materials, et cetera, and that's also baked into the future centralized funding with the new staffing model. The fine arts partnerships, working with community-based organizations, nonprofits, organizations in the city of Houston. We have a very rich arts scene to bring them into school, so we're very excited about that. We set aside about $19 million, as we talked about previously, to help schools with increasing books or digital, if their preference was digital materials, literacy materials for schools. The expansion of counselors and social workers, new buses to help with the transportation routes to make sure that our students can come to school and get to school in a safe manner, and student laptop devices. So again, these are just some examples of some of the major categories. In fact, there are, if you go to the HISD ESSER website, which is linked here, you can see all of the allocations. So again, going to transparency, anyone can go in there and see where have all of the funds been allocated in terms of ESSER. And then at this point, what I'd like to do is ask, if it's okay to Superintendent House, to ask Dr. Matney to come up and talk about some of the evaluation that planning that's happening right now. I think it's very exciting because it's going to help us learn, you know, what is the impact on students so that we know what to sustain even beyond the shelf life of ESSER or what to possibly stop doing, and then some of the transparency dashboards that are being developed as well. So Dr. Matney, if you can.
Madam President, I have a legal question.
Trustee Bluford-Dingus.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a legal question you'd like to address.
It can't wait.
No.
Okay. The board will now adjourn to closed session under Chapter 551 of Texas Government Code Open Meetings Act, subsections 551.0004, .071, .072, .073, .074, .076, .082, .0821, .083, .084, .089. Should board final action vote or decision on any matter considered in the closed session be required, such final action vote or decision shall be taken at the open meeting covered by this notice upon the reconvening of this public meeting at a subsequent public meeting of the board upon notice thereof. The board is adjourned to closed session at 4:04 p.m.
Did Lisa send my pens?
She didn't give me anything, so.
She didn't.
No, so did she run off your pen?
This meeting of the Board of Education is now reconvened at 4:19 p.m. Board members present in the board auditorium are Trustee Wade, Trustee Guidry, Trustee Santos, Trustee Bluford Daniels, Trustee Dygard, Trustee Baker, and Trustee Hernandez. And we are waiting on Superintendent House. And there he is. Ta-da! So it is my understanding that the will of the board is to continue. Okay, thank you. Superintendent House.
Yes, I'd like to invite Dr. Allison Matney to the podium to share with us.
All right, good afternoon, trustees. So I am excited to share our plans for monitoring and evaluating our ESSER programs. Our program evaluation process will consist of two separate sections. So one is going to be, and you'll see that on the left, there will be a document, and I'll share with you a mock-up in a subsequent slide, that is considered a brief, and it will outline program goals and objectives, key findings, recommendations, the total spend, allocation and total spend. And then a second section is going to be a dashboard that we're going to be producing to be able to query different outcomes based on programs, campuses, and each of these sections will incorporate perception data, outcomes data, demographic data, and process data. And there's some examples of those measures listed on this slide. So our whole program evaluation strategy is listed here, and it consists of 5 levers. So we're really looking at targeting our evaluation process, rigorously evaluating the programs that lack strong evidence of effectiveness. Back to some of the comments earlier, do we know what we need to continue, what we need to stop, what we need to continue at the end of ESSER with general fund because we saw such strong evidence, or the opposite direction. Program assessment, so reviewing and comparing that program evidence for effectiveness. Implementation oversight, so some of what this team is doing is just ensuring programs are delivered effectively. Some of the strengths we've already seen is that the research team is involved in having conversations with all of the departments. So we've already seen some efficiencies and connected some departments on work that overlaps and been able just to be that constant thread throughout. Budget verification as well, so ensuring budget allocation matches the program designation. And then outcome monitoring, of course, determining whether the programs are achieving the results that they were set out to achieve. So this is an example of the brief that will be created for each of the program areas. You'll see here there will be a project description, again, the allocation and expenditures. The goals are developed based on the original application for the ESSER money by the department. So they were required to set out the what they wanted to achieve using these dollars, the goals for the program, and tying it to the board goals. So each one of these is tied to the board's goals. We also are going to include key findings from each of the programs, and then recommendations, and then the demographic characteristics of the population that either participated in or was served by these various programs. This slide outlines a mock-up of a sample dashboard that we're going to be creating that will, again, allow us to query between programs, be able to look at what programs are at what campuses, and all of this will be posted and publicly accessible in order to show off all the great things that are happening here in HISD and to the end of being incredibly transparent with our outcomes and our programs. So finally, we are also creating an ESSER spending dashboard. So the first one was a programmatic dashboard. This one, we're looking at creating one that's going to allow the public to view the allocations, the spend, the projects that are allocated, and track alignment of the funds to our strategic commitments. So we're in the works of developing this and creating a mock-up, and hope to have this deployed soon for public to be able to access and track.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matney. Colleagues, I know some of you are already in the queue, so we will go in that order. Trustee Guidry, and just to clarify, you can ask questions on any of the slides of anything that's been presented today. Again, I apologize for the confusion on that.
Thank you, President Cruz and Dr. McNee. Let me just go back really, really quick. I have a question on the previous presentation on page 24 with respect to the salaries, just real briefly. Is he here? Oh, I'm sorry. Is that okay, Superintendent? And it would be on slide 24, because I didn't ask this, because, now, let me ask you something. With respect to the comprehensive high schools, so on your earlier page, I think it's 23, it doesn't really break it down as to the salaries, the current salaries of the different levels of schools. But I could see here on page 24, you do have it broken down. And my question is it based on this, the risk load, the -2 to +2? How does that affect your numbers?
Mr. Grant Skinner.
Thank you. First, on slide 23, the comparisons to other districts, it doesn't break this out in that way because not all of these districts have the same way of compensating high school principals.
Okay.
So we looked at their average overall versus our average overall. On slide 24, sorry, to back up. Slide 23, the Houston ISD numbers that are there are current averages. What you see on slide 24 is the proposal for next school year and beyond. And the compensation plan is to implement the flat salaries that you see in the school year 2022 to 2023 column there. And on top of that, each principal could have a school complexity factor amount added and or a principal experience factor added. That section in the middle indicates that based on the level of need in the school, the school complexity factor could be up to $7,000.
And what does that encompass, the complexity factor? I understand, obviously, the experience factor, but what is encompassed within the complexity factor?
Sure, I will share and give credit where credit is due. So Dr. Matney and her team did research to develop a barriers analysis, and I will talk about this, and I know that if she wants to provide some follow-up afterward, she might. What I would say is it looks at about 20 different factors of either institutional barriers associated with a school, or social barriers associated with a neighborhood. This stemmed from research nearly a decade ago, and I think in one case in New York City, where research was done on what are all the barriers that show up in schools as risk for students and for their achievement. And Dr. Matney and her team applied this to HISD using data that we have available. And the result of this is a range from -2, which would be the most barriers, to +2, which would be the least barriers. And we're planning to implement a sliding scale where a principal will get $0, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, up to $7,000 for this factor based on the barriers that apply to their school.
Okay, and that's in addition to the base salary, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Now, is this same complexity factor going to be applied for teachers as well?
The complexity factor is a component of principal salaries and assistant principal salaries. It is not applied to the teacher salary scale.
Okay. We might have to talk about that in the future, right? On page 40, thank you so much. I appreciate your presentation and your responses. On page 40, this has to do with the ESSER. Start talking, Superintendent, to cut off my time. You just talk. Okay, so with respect to the campus base allocations, did you all make those allocations and the decisions on which schools would get how much money? Or did they have to submit a form to you requesting their need and identifying why they need the amounts from the ESSER funds that they actually
Sure.
needed?
Dr. Cruz, let you address that.
So I believe all of these were based on a methodology that was designed by research and evaluation. We shared that with you all several months ago. We're happy to share it again, but there's a methodology for every one of these. But again, if a school were to exhaust any of these, they can always reach out and ask for more.
So the funds that were presented to us on, I think it was the next slide, slide 43, where we could go to the project allocations, and if we went to those allocations, which I did, and we found the amounts that was provided for every school, that is the amounts that was based on the projections you all made, correct? The factors that you made.
If I'm understanding you correctly, yes, ma'am.
Well, I mean, do I need to restructure my question?
So the allocations were, so for example, the House Bill 4545, the first one, the tutorial, the biggest one, that was, Dr. Matney can speak more to the methodology, but it was, they found out how many students qualify for those tutorials by campus in the district, then multiply that times the hourly rate and the number of hours tutorials the students would get, and that became that baseline allocation that you see there. So there was a similar methodology for each one of these. In for example, the safety allotment, it was a fixed amount per student, so it was just the number of students at the school times that fixed amount. So again, we're happy to provide the exact methodology for every one of these, but every school, with the exception of the one that says high schools only, because clearly it's only high schools, received funding. And again, if they need more funding, we can provide them with more funding.
Yeah, and I guess the reason I'm asking is because I'm looking at the wraparound services, the expanded wraparound services allotment, and I'm just not I guess I need to see how that allotment was made.
Yes,
Thank you
ma'am.
so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Trustee Dygard?
Thank you. I'm really excited about this dashboard, but I'm going to go back to, for the earlier slides. What is the primary driver in the budget that will improve the quality of instruction for our students?
So, Dr. Byrd?
I'm sorry, if you could repeat the question.
What's the primary driver of the budget that will improve quality of instruction for all of our students?
So I think that's the purchase of consistent instructional materials across all schools will be the primary driver that's going to improve, because we can support, if everybody is using the same materials, if all schools are using the same materials, we can support that centrally, and that will increase student achievement, and that will drive, improvements.
And then what will be the primary driver in this budget that will increase the quantity of quality instruction for students?
I'm not sure. Increase the quantity of?
Increase the quantity of quality. I mean, and quality instruction is a driver of student achievement,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
So how are you going to make sure students have quality instruction and the necessary quantity
Right.
of quality instruction?
Oh, that's okay. So I think that's a couple of ways. I think one, the consistent instructional materials, but two, that's also looking at our professional development practices and how we're preparing teachers to.
So maybe I should direct this to the superintendent. What is the primary driver in the budget for quality instruction?
So one of the primary drivers is ensuring that we have teachers first of all, and compensating our teachers. And as Dr. Byrd indicated, once we have the core group that we know that can move this work forward, we can ensure that they have great professional development. We can ensure that they have solid curriculum. But the primary piece is ensuring that we have the troops in line to be able to do this work.
This wasn't, I just feel that this is something at the higher level that needed to be answered, so thank you. My next question is, you mentioned several organizations, including Families Empowered, have given reports. Can we please have copies of the reports from those different organizations?
Be glad to.
Can we please have a copy of the rubric by which schools will be, the decisions will be made for schools that request additional funds? And principals have received their budgets. What has been the feedback? What positive feedback has been received? What are their concerns? And what have you learned from them that concerns you?
Yep, so of course, principals just recently received their budgets in our most recent principals meeting, and we've also had the opportunity, and Dr. Watts, if you don't mind sharing kind of what we did to garner some of that feedback, specifically from a couple of the groups that have given that feedback.
Sure. It's actually been an ongoing process over the last few weeks. I think it culminated to some extent yesterday in the principals meeting. But we received input from our Superintendent's Leadership Council. I have had one-on-one individual conversations and emails back and forth with individual principals as well. Their response, I'll be honest, and I have artifacts to demonstrate this. Generally, people are excited about the new direction. Of course, with any change management, there is an emotional component. There is an aspect, people are unsure. But as early as today, my team is boots on the ground, sitting shoulder to shoulder with principals, helping them problem solve. In places where principals have given us feedback to say, listen, we don't think that will work, we have made adjustments, and we will continue to make adjustments so that our campuses continue to operate optimally.
My next question is, obviously, there's a driver in this to improve DNF campuses. So we have fewer students in DNF campuses. What in this budget is, show me where in this budget you're going to be expanding opportunities for students equitably throughout the district for A and B campuses. Like, how are you going to lift all ships?
Yeah. Dr. Watts?
And this is a combination answer, I think, with my partner in academics. But I think one of the main drivers you've heard is the high quality instructional materials. That's only going to lift the ship for all kids, A, B campuses, and D and F campuses. In terms of budgetary implications for D and F schools, that's mostly coming from Title I. So it's not a new budget allocation. In fact, the D and F strategy, there will be no budget implications in terms of our general funds. All of that is a Title I. Is sourced from Title I.
So how confident would you be that in 5 years, this is a 5-year strategic plan, that in 5 years we will have all A and B campuses?
That's, of course, the aspiration moving forward. We wish I could predict and see the future, but that's definitely the aspiration.
What's the major driver towards achieving that, and what evidence do you have that it would give you that would help you achieve that goal for our kids?
And I can attempt. So, I think when you look at the efforts that we're making around DNF campuses, we're not doing anything outside of what research says you need to do. A, you need to have great teachers. B, you need to have high quality instructional materials. Those components around transforming campuses are solidly researched. I believe it's about the execution. It's about the support of the leader. It's about the support of the teacher. It's about also being agile enough to make adjustments when adjustments need to be made. Again, I wish I could look in a crystal ball and say this will be the outcome, but I believe if we execute with fidelity, we will reach our desired outcome.
Employee raises should be a top priority as currently proposed. How will this budget not create another structural deficit?
I'd like to have you to jump in reference to the last question.
Yes, to the last question that you asked, Trustee Duggar, I would say that several middle schools and elementary schools that were not, we're putting in the transformation schools, but many of them have volunteered to participate in the first year, and that was completely voluntary. So there's a lot of excitement among our school principals for implementing high-quality instructional materials. I just got a list today of 10 more schools that want to participate.
I was talking about compensation.
Yeah, no, I was just for the last question that you.
Follow up on your last question. Yeah.
So we're not. This isn't going to, we can do all of these raises and not create a new structural deficit.
So the idea, of course, in the first year, as the plan indicated, is to, okay.
Oh, sorry, I can't see that. Okay, sorry.
You know what, you on a roll today?
Okay,
I'm gonna get the time back.
go ahead.
I thought I asked it, how is this not, everything I'm seeing here looks like we're headed towards another structural deficit in a couple of years to continue to pay these increased salaries, which we need to do.
Absolutely.
But what are we cutting to make sure that we don't have a structural deficit?
And again, we can't afford not to do this in order to ensure that we, increase enrollment, increase the quality of instruction. I think some tough decisions have to be down the road, quite frankly. So the planning over the course of the next year will have to be in play in terms of what those tough decisions will look like. Of course, on the front end, we are deciding and developing some of those cuts at the departmental level, at the school level with the freeze that we just put in place. So we're starting some of that on the front end, but they're going to have to be some bigger cuts as we move forward. And that will be a part of what the next 12 months will be about, the strategy behind, is it schools? Is it, centralized? So that's a part of the next stage. As I mentioned before, I spent 18 years in a school district that had to close 15 schools. I was the deputy superintendent at that particular time and was in charge of what that work looked. We took a full year to study the San Francisco model, the Pittsburgh model, before we actually moved forward to choose that particular big decision. We chose to do that versus laying off. So we'll look at everything and decide what the way forward is going to be. We don't know exactly what we're going to choose right now, but we know we're going to have to make some significant decisions to ensure that we get where we need to go financially on a continuum. No, it's indicating that we need to make decisions. I think the can has been kicked down the road for quite some time.
It feels like where we've been every year, so it's okay, I'm out of time. Thank you.
Trustee Santos.
Thank you, President Cruz and Superintendent House. I just want to make sure that we are not repeating our past mistakes. A past superintendent made sure every student had consumables and high-quality instructional materials. And there was no way of knowing, like you talked about execution of these things, but it was huge waste of taxpayer dollars. And how are you gauging what high-quality instructional materials are? How are you qualifying high-quality instructional materials? And how are you going to ensure that it's being carried out with fidelity?
Yep. Dr. Burke. So the materials are approved by the Texas Education Agency. They're also on reports that they're greenlit. They're aligned to the TEKS. It's, in fact, Eureka TEKS it's a product just for Texas, so we know it's aligned. How will we support it? That's why we're deliberately implementing in a phased approach rather than doing all schools at one time. We're going to do a group of schools, make sure we have a consistent implementation so that we can scale that the next year. So it's very deliberate that we're an implementation. That's why I also want a cross-section of schools. We want some schools that are A and B to volunteer in the first year, and then and mix that with schools that are in the transformation cohort, as well as schools that have had trouble over the academic performance over the years.
Thank you. Superintendent House, page 28. Does this plan address rising healthcare costs to employees? You said that somebody said that there was an increase of $10 million to the health insurance. What is the cost of that to each current employee if approved?
Mr. Grady, I know we talked about what that increase looks like in terms of overall. She's specifically asking about the cost specifically to the employee.
The employee. My understanding, and we should get you further detail on it certainly, but my understanding is the $10 million increase is the increase to the district and not the employee.
So how are you going to see, who's going to bear the brunt of that $10 million?
The district.
So you're not going to increase the cost of health care for employees?
That's my understanding.
Sweet. All right. Okay, so what are the percentages of teachers, the actual numbers that we have in each step currently? Page 20.
Page 20, can you repeat that one more time? The number of,
Teachers that we have in every step. So
we can
Step
provide you with that information. I don't know that we have it on deck with us at this time.
Okay, page 19. How is this $210,000 for the police step increases the best use of these dollars to improve student achievement or student learning?
How is, slow down just a little bit.
How is the $210,000 for the police step increase the best use of these dollars to improve student learning?
I think it goes into kind of what Trustee Guidry talked about earlier, in ensuring that we have the kind of safety in our buildings. And originally, I was thinking my CO, Chief Operation Officer's mind and facilities and safety. But our officers are extremely important. Our officers have done a heck of a job to ensure that our safety is a campus. And much like our teachers, we want to keep our officers. So while they won't be seeing the kind of percentage raises that many of our employees will see, or like our teachers will see, we want to make certain that they're on pace to still be competitive with the market.
Okay, so when was the last time each category received a pay raise? So we saw the comparative, which thank you, by the way, for those charts for principals, the APs, and so forth. So when was the last time each one of these categories received a pay raise? What were the percentages of those increases?
We'll get that information for you.
Okay. Okay, and to Mr. Grant Skinner, I know you referenced some of our policies that we had in place, for example, the support staff that we got them to $14, and that's how we're competitive with surrounding districts. Historically, we've had each department and how much their expenses and what their cuts would be, and that's how some of those adjustments were made. But in 2019, there was a policy passed for an enrollment study. Specifically, I believe it was Trustee Dygard, yours with the overlap in Trustee Baker's district, and we were supposed to do an enrollment study in that particular area, a compensation study and an enrollment initiative for those specific areas. So can anybody provide that information to this board?
It's a 2019
It was
study?
a 2019 policy amendment where we had an enrollment study done in that specific area, because I think it was Dr. Cruz that mentioned that certain parts of town had, we were losing certain kids to charters, but we had an enrollment study for that particular side of town. We had the compensation study for each, for all employees, and the enrollment initiative we had for that side of town. So if something or someone can get that information, I would really like to see that.
We'll dig back.
Thank you. And I know I'm out of time.
Trustee Wade.
Thank you.
Okay, a quick question. On the phase 3 that we were discussing about where we're going to make cuts when we get to the phase 3 part of this budget, it might be worth us talking about that sooner than later, just so we understand what needs to come. I mean, ask about the bond over and over and over again. And if we don't know the data on how the cuts are going to go, we can't best associate that to where we're going to build schools unless we know where we're going to make cuts.
You're absolutely correct, and it's actually, Trustee Cruz and I had some of this conversation today or whatnot. We actually met with a representative at Rice that actually does the kind of predictive analysis of, how and whether it's appropriate to move forward with a bond. So we're in the midst of that conversation right now to figure out whether the environment is healthy enough to be able to pass a bond. So we're engaged in that conversation right now, but I completely agree. We need to, as quick as possible, dig in combination with a potential bond around what some of those major cuts will be for the long term.
Thank you. Am I crazy, but what's ESSER 1? I mean, do we know, am I done? ESSER 1, I know that was the first round, but I'd like to, I don't know what the budget allotment for ESSER 1 was.
Yep.
I'm new, so I'm just trying to understand better. Yes.
So it was all towards ADA and also private nonprofits. So the allocation that we received from TA was a whole harmless, and as well as about $2 million towards private nonprofit that we had to. That was a mandate.
Okay. All right. Thank you for answering that. Okay. I just didn't know, so I thought I'd ask. And then, I have one more question. So I know that during this budget allocations, we did a lot of tech devices that went out to all the students, computers, laptops, that kind of thing. That is going to be something that, have we considered that going forward? That's going to be, as we know how fast technology moves, I don't see that anywhere in the conversation, and that's something that is going to be a huge budget issue going forward in the new day that we're in.
So definitely, as Mr. Gilhousen makes his way to the microphone, one-to-one technology is definitely a major push. We actually have seen an increase as we speak at the middle school level. Our high schools are already one-to-one. About a little over 50% of our middle schools are one-to-one, and we're looking forward to climbing down the ladder as far as possible. Mr. Gilhousen?
Yeah. And so it is actually in there on page slide 42
Okay.
is where it's at, where we've got IT student devices that are allocated there. So our goal is to do that in the fall of 2022 and then continue to build off of that.
Okay, so you're saying that the last one, which is what is that, 41 million?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and then, thank you for that very much. And so I'm going to go back real quick to a quick question about the teacher burnout. So when you added tutoring, and even though you gave them pay increases, did you find that accelerated burnout to teachers? Do we know?
I think what we equated, and I've had a chance to see this in two districts because we actually changed, went from about the same amount to the new amount in both my old district and in HISD. And what we were really trying to do on the front end was ensure that we attracted as many teachers as possible. And that is exactly what happened. We had a number of teachers that came and moved forward to provide tutoring. And that's been a major plus in terms of our students being able to focus on the learning loss that we know that they've had.
Okay, and then on that, with losses in elementary schools kind of being our biggest number of losses that we know, that seems to be the level of incoming students that we're losing. I don't see allocations based on those big loss areas. I mean, I know there were high school focused on testing and that kind of thing, but are we making sure that we're getting a focus back into the elementary school?
Absolutely.
Level?
As you'll see, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
So as you'll see, the overall plan, of course, goes back as we talk about the new changes that our principals just saw in their allocation sheets. That's a big part of improving that overall school experience as a whole. What we did find out is that elementaries saw a big majority of, and I hate to call it wins, but our elementary and middle schools saw more allocations when we went to this model, which will, in my opinion, make a difference because those are smaller schools. At the high school level, it's a little bit easier to absorb positions if they did have a loss. So elementaries, it's definitely something that will make a major difference.
Okay, thank you. My time is up, sorry, thanks.
Trustee Bluford Daniels.
Thank you. We're going to go back to the front packages, particularly page 4. Let's see.
for page 5, I'm sorry, because we talked about a lot about increased enrollment, and I'm wondering what methods are being used to forecast the possibilities for increased enrollment. Specifically, are we focusing on additional specialized English learner teachers? Because, as everybody's paying attention to the news, we've got an increase in immigrants this year and, well, the latter school year, particularly with Afghanistan and Mexican and Haitian and Ukrainians. And so with all that, we'll have to increase English learner teachers to service that population, correct? And I've not heard any conversation about that, any type of forecast for it.
Yep. And I'd be glad to have, I think you asked 3 different areas.
I ain't through. I got about 5 more questions,
Grant
too.
Skinner or Dr. Byrd or Dr. Watts around English language learners.
Our baseline model provides positions from our general funds, and then there are positions that schools can also add with the funds that they have been allocated to meet the unique needs at their school. So I think in both of those cases, where there are more students, whether they are English learners or refugees, the baseline model and schools' flexible funds should be able to support that.
And, you know, and I think I probably use it, but I hate that term, refugees. That's why I was referencing them as immigrants, because there's so many different cultures that we have to try and accommodate. Also, one thing I wanted to add, too, about the staffing model. Somebody asked a question about not being heavy on the top, and I just wanted to say that we want it to look like a snow cone. We don't want, you know, like an hourglass, not a snow cone. So we want it to dwindle down to those who need it most, those at the bottom who are actually doing the work. And also I wanted to point out too, Dr. Cruz, we still have horses and farm animals in Northeast. So I've not heard any talk about FFA. And you mentioned about when did the principals do the projections for this year? Have they done their projections already for this year?
They have.
Okay, and so they were giving this information yesterday as well?
Right.
Okay, and are you starting to get comments or concerns that's being addressed to you all as it relates to this? Because obviously, you know, we just got it today, so we're trying to decipher it as well, which is why so many questions, y'all, on this package. Dr. Allen has always stated that there are multiple times that we have to, as a former admin, that we have to see. You know what? That's why I wanted to go an extra round.
Trustee Baker.
I could have kept going. Everybody else did.
Testing. For the sake of time, I only have one question. And I'm just going to go ahead and address the elephant in the room real quick. If, say for instance, after we have depleted our ESSER funds, for example, and all of your adjustments that we're going to make, say for instance, you made all of your adjustments and still there's a shortfall, what or our contingencies that will exclude tax increase, bankruptcy, and things of that nature? That's all I have for now. And by the way, I want to see the teachers and employees get a raise right away. But that question is the biggest question I had. Did you catch it all?
So you're essentially just asking what happens beyond ESSER?
Yes.
Yeah.
And beyond ESSER and your adjustments that were so eloquently laid out by your awesome team here, you know.
Yeah. So as we talked about earlier, the idea is to go into the planning and ensure that over the course of the next year that we develop in conjunction with hopefully the possibility of a bond, but we have to develop what those major cuts, as Ms. Dygard indicated earlier, she felt like it's being kicked down the road again. But if you move forward and make the decisions and put a plan in place, and I've been a part of a district that has done that before and done it in a very organized manner to ensure that the community felt heard. But there's several different ways to do it. That's just one way. We'll have to determine what that's going to look like for HISD. But, you know, as Nike indicated, you have to just do it versus kicking it down the road.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask my older Leonard question?
We're gonna do. Trustee Hernandez?
Thank you. I'm going to do some follow-up questions first. Is purchasing the same instructional materials across the district going to save the district money? If so, how much?
I don't know that we know exactly how much. Do we know if there's an efficiency around the idea of what we're doing with quality curriculum materials?
There should be. We can get you, so part of this first year cost is being paid for by the TEA. So, but we can get you a cost, we can get an analysis of that. But it should ultimately save money because of scale.
So there's $30 million that we are freezing from campuses. How much do we expect to spend from that, from now to the end of the year?
There's $30 million that are being, you mean the freeze?
Yes.
The frozen from, and how much of that do we expect to carry over?
To actually spend?
It really depends on the needs that are presented to us, quite frankly. We're looking forward to hearing those needs and determining whether they are major needs that are focused on teaching and learning. And that's the idea. Again, as a former principal, I know that at about this time of the year, if I hadn't expended, from an instruction standpoint, the dollars that I have in my budget, they may or may not be instructionally focused for the rest of the school year. So we'll determine that and look at each ask as they come to us centrally.
From the ESSER presentation, I may have missed it, but when is the ESSER dashboard supposed to be available to the board and to the public?
Yep. Dr. Mandy?
So I'll address each of them. So the first, the program evaluation dashboard, as soon as we have our first set of findings, that's when we'll push that out with that first set of findings. And then the finance one, right now we're working on arranging all the input data sets, and we're almost finished with that. And so then it's just about building out the Power BI. So we're looking at maybe a couple of months before we'll be able to publish that one.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a couple of questions from slide 6. Can you just explain why the special education and dyslexia are in different buckets?
Jim, do you mind sharing on slide 6 some insight around that question? Slide 6.
Off the top of my head, I don't know. Let me find out and come back to you with an answer.
Okay, on slide 18, I know I've mentioned this to you before, Mr. House, are we going to continue the practice of having administrators in campuses with teacher contracts?
Are we going to continue to have administrators on campuses with teacher contracts?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember talking about that, but we can definitely dig into it. Ms. Hutchins Taylor, can we put that on our list to discuss further? Sure. Yeah.
And then from slide 14, we said that we were going to save $100 million. Is this every year, or is this over multiple years?
Jim?
That's just for this year. That's just to get through this year.
Okay.
We're going to have to reevaluate it going forward, as the superintendent stated.
Okay. And then from slide 24, when will principals know what the risk load is for their campus, and how often will the risk load be evaluated or reevaluated?
Good question. Mr. Grant Skinner?
We have not picked a specific date to communicate to principals about their risk load, but I think it will be in the next few weeks. I would have to defer to our research and accountability team about the frequency of updates.
And then has there been any discussion about bilingual stipends for administration?
Legal stipends?
Bilingual.
Bilingual stipends. Mr. Grant Skinner?
This question did come to us from an administrator recently, and we are considering it. What I would say is that there are a lot of perspectives on individual characteristics of principals that might tie into student achievement and therefore perhaps should qualify for a stipend, and we need to weigh this against all of those others as well.
Okay, has there been discussion around bilingual stipends for anyone other than teachers?
No.
Okay. And then my last question is, I know that it was stated that you found that parents want quality and innovative programs. This is not a new development for HISD. New programs are not being rolled out in the near future, and there's still not a plan for the rollout. So can you explain this delay and what we're doing to make sure that we have innovative programs and giving parents what they want?
So I can't, of course, speak to what the past has looked like in terms of the lack of innovative program rollout, but the focus in this plan is to address it and to not kick the can down the road. So as Dr. Watts talked about, it's about the implementation, it's about the fidelity. We know what the need is. We went out and asked, we got the feedback. We know what the research tells us. So now it's about executing and ensuring that we develop with that plan. We would love to have that coupled with a bond issue in the future. But regardless of what happens, whether there's a bond or not, we know that we have to right-size our programs in the district and ensure that we have quality programs throughout HISD.
Thank you.
Trustee Allen?
Thank you. My question is back on slide 14 about the third one, the freeze on the campus-based funds. I'm like piggybacking on Trustee Baker's question when he was talking about getting things done in a timely manner, having transparency. I know that you said you were doing the freeze, and I know you said they got it after we did, which means they got it after 2 o'clock. But I have campuses, like when I told you before, because that's why I'm so excited about this bond, that do not have the things in their campus that they need to teach teachers with, like smart boards. And I was telling you how Kelso got 5 smart boards the first year because she had to save up for it. 5 smart boards last year, she had to save up for it. There are schools like River Oaks just got rid of 61 smart boards and got a whole new batch. But I have schools in my district that are saving up for it. So if she's saving up these 5 smart boards, how long do they have to get to spend this money before you snatch it out of them and tell them I'm taking out 75%? Because if she's saving for 5 smart boards and she has outstanding debts, I know they said that, you can look, but how much time are you giving them for that freeze right there?
So the freeze is instituted as of today.
But you just told them today.
Correct. But what we will do is offer every school the opportunity to present a specific need. If they have a specific need, whether it be smart boards, whether it be additional, instructional materials or whatever, they can present that to the school's office, and we have a process that will either approve or disapprove those particular requests depending on that need.
So if she was saving for 5 more boards this year, and she has 20 teachers, which means this would be 15. So if she really needed 10 smart boards, she can ask for 10 smart boards that she didn't have money for at first?
We'll review the need. I don't know exactly what
she can't wait on a brand new school. We can't wait on the bond. These are teaching tools that the teachers need to teach.
I completely understand where you're coming from. Been there in that seat as principal.
Was that a no?
No, it wasn't a no. It was that we will review that request and determine whether it's, in our eyes, an allowable expense moving forward. And I think we have to look at this in its totality through the district. We know that for so many years we've operated this district with the deficit mentality and allowed for that to occur year after year after year. We're putting some stopgaps in place. But at the same time, we want to allow for some of those stopgaps to be screwed off in certain situations. And it may be a situation like this, it may not. But we'll take a look at those. and ensure that if that possibility shows the need.
I mean, teachers need smart boards to teach. I mean, if you're sitting there with some chalkboards and that old school stuff, no, that's my one thing I know that I need schools, the bonds for the schools in my area, because I know the lack of materials. When I was telling you about the other schools before, this is just not the one that's like this.
We'll definitely take a look at it.
And the outstanding debts, do they need to say, listen, I have a bill that has not come in, don't take all my money?
Yep, we'll take a look at all of those pieces as we move down the road, definitely.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up round 2 this time. Okay, so going to slide 12, slide 11 and 12. I want to make sure I understand the deficit. So does this include, this is without ESSER, these deficits?
Jim?
Yes, that's correct. So the
Okay.
deficit, so if I got to go back to 10, right? There's the $69 million operating deficit that we're looking at this year, right? And if you flip to 11, how are we addressing that deficit? We can use 88 million of the hold harmless in that. We're gonna take care of the deficit and then put some money into just the general
So
fund.
then for 23 budget,
Exactly.
okay.
And then, I guess in fiscal year 23, we have a deficit of 196 million. And the ESSER money there would be the indirect cost piece, that $50 million.
Okay.
The rest of it coming from, the savings that have been built up.
And did I hear you correctly when you said that ESSER, like that's an approved expenditure, is actually to hold ourselves harmless? Did I hear you say that correctly?
So the ESSER, I look at the ESSER as 2 different buckets, one being the hold harmless, which was more like mitigating loss enrollment, which is what happened, right? Immediate loss enrollment. The second piece of ESSER is this concept of the indirect costs, the IDC piece of it, which is the funds the government allows you to run the programs, to do the dashboards and to do a lot of these things that the district is putting forth, to cover some of the cost of doing that.
Okay. And I guess my concern is, so what percent of ESSER is for accelerated learning? What percent are we using for teacher compensation, and what percent are we using to actually plug the deficit?
We can get that
Okay.
information for you.
Yeah, so my concern is that I understand you need time to figure out where the cuts are going to be in these tough decisions, but my concern is why we're not doing it now. We're using ESSER to basically keep us afloat, right? And my interpretation of that is we're balancing the budget on the backs of children instead of using this money to actually catch them up, which is what my understanding of the intention is. So why are we waiting to balance the budget?
Yep, I think we're doing both, quite frankly. I think I can't remember what slide number that shows all the different things, the commitments that we made from an ESSER standpoint in terms of teaching and learning loss. But what I also know is that when you make very difficult decisions about, and this is much worse than we thought it was, quite frankly. And we needed to bring an organization like A&M in to take a close look. We brought in, folks from curriculum instruction. We had audits in 4 different areas. So we've just recently finished that. And what we know now is that the cuts are going to have to be significant. And moving forward, there's going to have to be time to plan that out. That's not something that you just go in without community voice, without community support and say, hey, this is what it's going to look like. I think this board would be eaten up. I would be eaten up as a superintendent. So we need to be very intentional about what that planning is going to look like and not just go say we're going to cut or close. So I'm very, very, like I said, I've lived this and been in a district where we took the approach where we had to close 15 schools. And when that board meeting came, because we did a year of planning and listen and learns and feedback and adjustments, that we had one community member that spoke against that plan in that last board when we took that plan to the table for approval. That kind of intentionality in the community has to be focused on, and I'm not saying that that's the road that we would take, but we will figure out exactly what it needs to look like and make the necessary cuts. Much like we've been intentional about bringing third parties in, we'll be just as intentional about developing our plan around what these cuts will look like.
Okay, I appreciate that context, and I'm also grateful that you've been seeking out expertise, such as A&M. Also, about ESSER, definitely encouraged about the transparency and having that dashboard, really looking forward to that, so thank you. My question around ESSER is, I saw there was a slide on evaluation. What and how are you evaluating, and how will you decide what will be continued or discontinued?
Dr. Madney?
Yeah, so we're evaluating all of the programs. It's a nice undertaking, and the how is really how we evaluate programs now. And it's building relationships with the departments that are running the programs. It's getting to understand and really embed in what that work looks like to know what's going to be important in an outcomes report. And then how we decide what moves forward using that research, looking at that brief, looking at the key findings and the recommendations that research is making at the bottom for cabinet to look at and say, this is worth investing in. We need to change how we're doing some things, continue, invest more in there. So looking at all of those components and using the research and the findings, much like we do for all of the other research we do.
So what data is it based on?
So here are some examples on this slide of evaluation measures. So we're going to, I'll give you an example, House Bill 4545. We're tracking the minutes that each student who is identified to receive those interventions. We're tracking their beginning of year, middle of year, end of year renaissance. We're looking at their STAR outcomes and to look at, was that additional 30 hours, did it make that impact that we envisioned it making?
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So trustees, it seems like the third round is desired. It is 5:15. Legal counsel is advising that we recess, do the taper, and then take this back up either before or after agenda review. So. It's up to y'all. Like, seriously, what do y'all want to do?
All the questions came?
Yeah, make a motion.
I move that we do a third round. As I informed you all earlier before this meeting, I have a child's program at school. I was really hoping we could get through 3 rounds of questions tonight. So I move that we do a third round.
I second.
After the Esther or before?
Yeah, I second.
David?
That's fine. And I would ask the administration, does the taper report have to be done tonight, or can it be rescheduled for a subsequent meeting? That's one option to consider.
Excellent. That's exactly what I was wondering. Dr. Madney?
Let me look at the dates. We do have to present it within a certain number of days of receipt, so let me go and do a calculation quickly.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I offer a friendly amendment to your thing? Once you've gone or whatever, can we just make sure we do taper after, today? Just want to get it over and done.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, trustee, so this is now starting round 3.
Do we need a vote?
I think there's a consensus.
Yeah, because, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And can I ask for a point of personal privilege? Will you all be
You're,
okay if I go first?
you're next in the queue.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So my next question is, what percentage of ESSER is being used for evidence-based accelerated learning for our students who are furthest behind? What percent is this compensation plan, and what percent is plugging budget holes?
Okay. Dr. Cruz, any insight there, or Jim?
We have to get back.
Yeah.
We'd have to get back to you on
We
that.
can put an analysis together of what that looks like.
Okay. And then what percentage of the general fund budget was allocated directly to schools for the fiscal year 2022 fiscal year 22, and what percent of the general fund budget is proposed to be allocated directly to schools for fiscal year 23?
Okay, we can provide additional insight around that analysis as well. We'll answer that request.
Okay, and then I keep hearing that based on what's been rolled out to principals so far, if they need additional dollars, there's some pot of money that sounds like is sitting out there. What is and I guess it's the same rubric. Is it the same rubric that's going to determine, like, so if a school says, oh, wait, I'm going to lose this program with how this funding is being allocated to me, it sounds like there's a rubric for y'all to determine if it qualifies to get funding. How much money have you set aside for those purposes?
Dr. Watson?
So the rubric specifically is for the 75% of funds that we're pulling back now. In terms of specific school needs to run programs in the upcoming school year, we have talked about setting aside positions so that for some reason, if the model that we provided to a principal, they can't make it work, they need an IB coordinator or they need a position. That is a request that I'm now asking my team to sit school by school, help the principal really think through and problem solve, and then get me a list of recommended positions that might still be needed, and then I can take back to the team and we can make those decisions.
Okay, but if
So that's not based on a rubric.
Okay, well then if you're saying there are no changes to and I do think we need to be evaluating our magnet program for a variety of reasons, but if you're saying there are no changes this year.
There were no changes.
And a campus that's not what I'm hearing.
There were absolutely no changes to the magnet funding. They received
Not to magnet funding, but schools don't fund all of their magnet programs. I mean, this is across the district. They don't fund it all out of, and we cut back a few years ago in how we funded magnet schools. So a lot of our programs are funded out of their PUA dollars. So I'm deeply concerned. It's one thing if you're saying we are going to be changing magnet programs this year. It's another thing if we're being told there are no changes to magnet programs this year for a school in any of the trustee districts.
That don't have them.
That don't have, but even if you do have them, may be funded by their PUA dollars and may be losing this program that has attracted a child to your school. And I'm really, really concerned about this.
an aspect of their program. I've heard about positions,
Okay.
but I've not
I'm
heard.
hearing from parents.
Okay.
So I don't know. I mean, I think this is something you all need to be aware of.
Sure.
And look at, whether it's magnet or whether it's something else that is going on programmatically in their school. It's one thing if this is an intentional change that you're going to make at the school level. Like, I'm open to that, but I don't want to do things that are going to compromise enrollment when families are like, okay, I've been accepted in a program. Is that program going to be there next year? Should I go to private school? Should I go to charter? Do I need to move? Like, they're worried.
I would be happy to address it and problem solve to fix a situation where a principal does not feel like they have the funding to fund some aspect of their program. It was not our intention to change anything. Again, I'm not getting that data, so I need to know specifically what the situation is.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Bluford Daniels.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to the strategic plan because we can address those in some of the schools, like my schools, my campuses that don't have magnet programs at all. So we don't have to worry about cutting the funding. We just have to worry about getting it sent there. Yeah, I know it. I know which ones have the magnet programs, ma'am. There's only one. And as mentioned earlier, there was a freeze on hiring beginning immediately. Will there be any monies returned to the district because of that freeze? Any idea approximately how much that could be?
And this is a 75% freeze of those campus-based funds right now. But the idea of a freeze is to realize the savings, to ensure that savings goes back to some of the deficit that we're dealing with. So, and again, like Dr. Allen asked when she was sharing about smart board specifically, we'll take